Hello, friends. I'm Peter O'Leary. I'm a lector and a catechist here at Ascension. I'm coming to you from my study, and I have a meditation for you on the eighth Sunday in Ordinary Time. Let's start with a reading of the Gospel, which comes from the Gospel of Luke. Jesus told his disciples a parable. Can a blind person guide a blind person? Will not both fall into a pit? No disciple is superior to the teacher, but when fully trained, every disciple will be like his teacher. Why do you notice the splinter in your brother's eye, but do not perceive the wooden beam in your own? How can you say to your brother, "Brother, let me remove that splinter in your eye," when you do not even notice the wooden beam in your own eye? You hypocrite! Remove the wooden beam from your eye first. Then you will see clearly to remove the splinter in your brother's eye. A good tree does not bear rotten fruit, nor does a rotten tree bear good fruit. For every tree is known by its own fruit. For people do not pick figs from thorn bushes, nor do they gather grapes from brambles. A good person out of the store of goodness in his heart produces good, but an evil person out of the store of evil produces evil. For from the fullness of the heart the mouth speaks. So, some things to note in this gospel reading. Jesus uses wood 3 times to make a point in this parable. And so emphatic is Jesus about the point he is making that he repeats the first example entirely a second time before shifting to a new example. Why do you notice the splinter in your brother's eye, but do not perceive the wooden beam in your own? It's a really striking image. And this gospel reading has what seems to be a clear didactic thrust, which we hear when Jesus rages, "You hypocrite! Remove the wooden beam from your eye first, then you will see clearly to remove the splinter from your brother's eye." Okay. The lesson is clearly moral. It's a version of "Judge not, lest ye be judged." How often, especially these days, when morality is weaponized for purposes of political gain and righteous satisfaction, do we judge hastily before looking at ourselves in the mirror? If you're like me, you do this all the time, whether you like it or not. And I think that reading of the gospel is meaningful and valuable. But I want to ask, might there be another, perhaps less obvious way to approach the splinter, the wood, the trees that bear either good or rotten fruit? Let's consider that Jesus in Luke's gospel is also speaking about vision. So vision is one of my favorite subjects in both literature and religion. The realm of vision, which is the apocalyptic realm, really fuels my imagination, giving it life and aspiration. And I want to share with you 2 statements involving wood that come from the Christian visionary tradition. The first one that I want to share with you is the 77th saying from the Gospel of Thomas. So let me read it for you. Jesus said, "I am the light that is over all things. I am all. From me all has come forth, and to me all has reached. Split a piece of wood, I am there. lift up the stone, and you will find me there. So the Gospel of Thomas comes from the great cache of Gnostic writings discovered at Nag Hammadi in Egypt in 1945. And these fragments, there were fragments from the Gospel that were circulating in the decades beforehand, to be found in other writings. They were quoted. But it wasn't until 1945 that the whole Gospel became available. And I feel like this saying speaks to the unitive desire in faith. Jesus claims to be everywhere, panentheistic in a modern coinage, which means God who is in everything. The splitting of the wood releases the unitive vision of God. And I love the action that the image implies. You have to split the wood. You have to release that sense of Jesus being everywhere. The second thing I want to share for you comes from Meister Eckhart's 48th sermon. So Eckhart, who's one of the greatest mystics in the Christian tradition, is a somewhat controversial figure because in his writings he took to the limits of reason what can be expressed and comprehended about God. He lived in the 13th and 14th centuries, and near the end of his life, several articles, that's the technical word for it, of his sayings were condemned by the church, which he had served and loved his whole life. And he died before being exonerated for these condemnations. And somehow, amazingly, he's not been fully rehabilitated. There's been some clerical dithering on this, which is to say there's an opinion that he doesn't need to be rehabilitated because he was never in any sense excommunicated or something like that. He was just condemned. Given the stature of what he wrote and the content that's there, it's an absurd result. So in that light, particularly the light of not being entirely understood, I'm going to share with you this passage from his 48th sermon. As I was coming here today, I was wondering how I should preach to you so that it would make sense and you would understand it. Then I thought of a comparison. If you could understand that, you would understand my meaning and the basis of all my thinking and everything I have ever preached. The comparison concerns my eyes and a piece of wood. If my eye is open, it is an eye. If it is closed, it is the same eye. It is not the wood that comes and goes, but it is my vision of it. Now pay good heed to me. If it happens that my eye is in itself one and simple, and it is opened and casts its glance upon the piece of wood, the eye and the wood remain what they are. And yet, in the act of vision, they become as one, so that we can truly say that my eye is the wood and the wood is my eye. But if the wood were immaterial, purely spiritual, as is the sight of my eye, then one could truly say that in the act of vision, the wood and my eye subsisted in one being. If this is true of physical objects, it is far truer of spiritual objects. You should know that my eye has far more in common with the eye of a sheep, which is on the other side of the sea, and which I never saw, than it has in common with my ears, with which, however, it shares its being. And that is because the action of the sheep's eye is also that of my eye. And so I attribute to both more in common in their action than I do to my eyes and my ears, because their actions are different. Sometimes I have spoken of a light that is uncreated and not capable of creation, and that is in my soul. In the innermost part, where no one dwells, there is contentment for that light, and there it is more inward than it can be to itself. For this ground is a simple silence, in itself immovable, and by this immovability all things are moved. All life is received by those who in themselves have rational being. Mysterious, as is the case with a lot of Eckhart's writings, and yet I'm fascinated that he chose this image of the wood in the same way that the assembler of the Gospel of Thomas did, and in the same way that Christ did as he was thinking about this image. Okay, so I'm going to leave you with a few questions. The first is, how might you split the wood of the beam that is in your eye? How might you see what is in front of you, truly seeing it in such a way that will both ennoble and improve you? This is the last Sunday before the beginning of Lent, and Lent is a time of preparation, but also a time of joy. And I think because it coincides a little more with spring and its development this year, we have a late Easter. For me, I think that joy will intensify as we move into the middle of April. So I wish blessings upon you this Lent, and I look forward to seeing you in church.